Americans are talking to each other. Any questions, comments about the reading, PowerPoint, technical difficulties, etc.? Have you started the reading?
Yes, the reading was actually very inspiring, very interesting and historical, you know, that covering some events like the discovery of Lucy, for instance. That was like in the tabloids. Yeah. I didn't write the paper though.
It's all right. My lawyer will talk to your lawyer. All right. Nobody in Cottage? Oh, one person in Cottage Grove. Okay. All right. Hearing no other questions or comments, just to clarify, because what I noticed on the online syllabus, it has this. On the syllabuses, the syllabi that I handed out, apparently someone made an editing decision and basically cut off the rest of it. All right, so first week extra credit. So in the history of Africa, read the frontispiece, dedication page, look up in particular first and last names, references in the list of dedication, acknowledgements, preference, Asante's teachers, particularly previous African historians, define the difference between the different life forms, etc., in case you missed that. So for example, Cheikh Anta Diop, Ali Masri, two African historians who are actually African, Egyptopithecus, and all other italicized life forms, hominids and pongids. And basically what I want you to do is be able to draw a line in language that makes sense to you in 2 pages. And also, next week, the reaction paper is due too. Right? Nea onim no sua aohu. That is also on my sweatshirt. It is one of the Adinkra symbols. The Adinkra symbols are an alphabet created by the Akan people of Ghana. And rather than, you don't use these in a sentence. Basically, each character itself is a story and has a story associated with it. Okay, so you don't put together, you don't conjugate vowels, etc., etc. It's a symbol for a particular story. And this one was chosen for rites of passage because it means lifelong learning. It simply means he who does not know can know from learning. So it's a symbol of knowledge, lifelong education, and continued quest for knowledge. So just to give you an example, right? So Akan Adinkra symbols, each one of which has its own story, its own name. So for example, this one that looks like a heart is Sankofa, means go back and fetch it, your history, your culture. This one, Jinyame, is very popular in Africa. You use it, you'd often see it actually in Christian church, even though it precedes Christianity. So it means Jinyame. Jinyame is the name of the character. It represents the turning of the universe, and basically it symbolizes the omnipotence of God. So nobody was around to see the beginning of the universe except God. Nobody would be around to see the end of the universe except God, and that's why you should accept God, A-C-C-E-P-T. Or shorter version also would say the character means, except for God, I fear nothing. Question? Yes?
The star before pointed over, what do you know the meaning of that one?
Well, what you can do.
Well, I have that tattoo. And I got it from an Ghana symbol, and I'm just curious what the actual translation is compared to what I thought it was.
What you can do is go to this link. And it will actually, you can put your cursor over it, and there'll be a live pop-up that will say what the character is. And there are also charts and all that other kind of stuff available too. As they used to say, as an exercise for the student. The Akan are an interesting folk. The British, when the British had enslaved, were bringing African slaves after taking over from the Spanish in the Caribbean, like in Jamaica in particular, the British made the mistake of thinking that because the Akan had a militaristic and warlike culture, that they would help the British civilize the other slaves. Really? You're seriously thinking that? Like you're gonna steal them from Ghana, bring them to Jamaica, and because they're militaristic, they're gonna work for you? I mean, but they were seriously doing that. Now, what the Akan did is, of course, is form Maroon communities. And so the Coromantee Maroons in Jamaica are actually ones that still live in the hills today, and basically organized using these symbols to be aware of African culture, to be able to speak multiple languages, free slaves, and create free societies within, on the outskirts of slavery. And we'll talk about them later when we get into that time period. So, ethnic studies, that branch of academe which concerns itself with non-white humanity as a scholarly discipline. And the only reason that has happened, so modern ethnic studies arose from student activism in the 60s as a continued reaction to the traditional canon of Western civilization. So when you write in papers, notice, there's homonyms, so canon only has one N, O-N, not two N's in the middle. The canon is a weapon. This canon is a song or a principle within, it's like an unwritten rule, like a song like from when the church was running the school. So the traditional canon of Western civilization. Basically the Columbus discovered America narrative. Now, student activism in the 60s was actually preceded, at least in this country, by an effort to look at history. So when Carter Woodson talked about Negro History Week, the idea was there was going to be 1 week in February where Woodson basically was placing that week. He was placing it between 2 birthdays. 2 different Republicans. My top 4 favorite Republicans out of 8. So, Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln's birthday. They're both Republicans, and they're both different as night and day. Okay? Frederick was part of the radical Republicans. Lincoln was a moderate in our modern history. So, the radical Republicans believed in the immediate ending of slavery, like now. Free the slaves, pay the slaves for their unpaid labor, give them education, give them 40 acres and a mule so that they could work for a living if that's what they wanted to do rather than go to school. Give them the vote. In other words, make them American citizens now. Okay, that's radical in the 1860s. Lincoln favored, slavery, emancipation, proclamation. Sorry, I got to do this. Okay, I don't know why yeah, I can understand why Obama likes it, but obviously, since Obama doesn't have a history of being owned by slaves or slavers in his history, you know, he can have a different view of that. So, Negro History Week, and that's why it's in February, not because it's the shortest month in the year, and but because Carter Woodson said, okay, Negro History Week is going to basically be dealing with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, because we need to understand both sides of this complex equation, which is not just starting in slavery, but noting that Africans have a history, and they have a history here. So, it was after the Watts riots that it got expanded to Black History Month. Yes?
I remember actually the implementation of that Negro History Week.
Well, it was an internal celebration.
When I was in school.
Yeah. Where did you go to school?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the 70s.
Okay. Well,
I'm from Philly.
yeah. So, again, that implementation within the schools was not voluntary on their part. They just didn't suddenly decide, oh, we're going to celebrate Negro History Week. That was kind of pressure. The same pressure that created either black studies or ethnic studies in general. I can talk about even though I wasn't at this school, this class in the 70s was the first black studies program in the state of Oregon. Before the U of O, before Portland, because of student activism. Okay? And then other groups of students say, oh, well, why not women's studies? Oh, why not boom, boom, boom. So it went from ethnic studies to interdisciplinary studies with increasing enrollment, because you notice just like then, now your numbers are increasing, and then the Board of Education decided to defund it, even though it was making money. So every year, or every 2 years, we look at, okay, I'm just going to up the ante because you never know whether it will be ended or not. I mean, they wouldn't end it just because of the money. Okay, come on, you can do this. Okay, so the traditional canon. Columbus discovered America. Slavery and Christianity brought civilization to computers. Wow. Okay. Uh-oh, the beach ball of death. Okay. All right. So, the traditional canon, Columbus discovered America. Slavery and Christianity brought civilization to savage Africa, savage America, Asia, and Oceania. Democracy came from Greece and Rome. So the traditional canon of Western civilization, the most enlightened and superior human civilization ever, arose from Greco-Roman democracy through Europe and finally culminating in the United States of America, which in this canon is represented as, it's our job to bring democracy to the world, right? Because the President of the United States is considered the leader of the free world, right? Okay? Even though we are 5% of the planet, that is the United States in population. So again, when you hear these statements that are put out without necessarily question, where is this coming from? This is coming from a particular curriculum, a particular idea. All right? And so when you look at, because this is what I was raised on. And if you went to an American school, you were raised on this too, pretty much. Not where this came from. Now, I'm a drug counselor, so I like to look at history. Did you know our national anthem was actually a British drinking song? I'm not making that up. To Anacreon in Heaven. You can look up the lyrics. It's a drinking song. There's actually a special term for when a song is written for a particular purpose and then you just erase the lyrics and then use the music and rewrite lyrics. That's what was done. So I'm just saying, wait, like we couldn't compose our own thing? We had to borrow something from the British? Why? And why a drinking song? Because, again, I'm a drug counselor, so I'm noticing the prevalence of alcohol problems. That's why, the Negro national anthem or the Black national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, didn't come from no British drinking song. And basically references, civil rights struggle beginning with slavery, et cetera, and we're looking forward to the bright future and all that. But always acknowledging God, which I would take to mean the Judeo-Christian God. But in any case, the traditional canon of Western civilization. So the implication being our form of democracy is the oldest and bestest form. And I know bestest ain't actual English, but you know what I mean. Because again, this is what is presented. Now, here's the challenge when we get into the business of nation building. American-style democracy is not necessarily going to work in the Middle East, particularly in a place like Afghanistan, where Jefferson and the Founding Fathers basically had the idea that when they wrote, "We the people," they meant them. And they meant that citizens had to have an education to participate in democracy, and that only people who had education could participate in democracy. If Afghanistan has a 95% illiteracy rate, Afghanistan has a 95% illiteracy rate. Okay? How do you train a fighting force to use guns if they can't read the manuals for the guns?
Well, and where's the responsibility of taking
There is that too.
Yeah, you go back to the 80s, education.
Right? Iraq also. How do you bring democracy to a place that was only held together by a dictator that we helped put in power and who basically suppressed all the differences? And so when you remove him, those differences come to the fore and you had no unifying ethic to hold the country together. And again, one unified language, one unified school system, et cetera, American-style democracy arose under certain conditions. And there's challenges with it, which we'll look at in a second.
It's more like divide and conquer, not democracy.
Well, there is that too. But let's look at Greco-Roman democracy. So let's say Rome with its Senate, which is why we use that word. Who was in the Senate and who was not?
Aristocracy.
Pretty much. But who was the aristocracy and who was a citizen and who was not? Okay? The meme originally for that this came from, only moneyed, educated men are citizens, therefore eligible for the Senate. And for example, to be Caesar or Praetor, there were no female rulers, even though the other pagan societies had queens. There is no queen of Rome, right? In the histories that we are represented. Now, Greece and Rome were multiracial societies. So there were, for example, African generals leading Roman armies. But we don't necessarily have a record of them being in the Senate or whatever. So, and since this is a model of Rome and Greece, as far as we're told in the traditional canon, therefore it becomes the model for American democracy. Right? So the idea is it's ancient, it works for us, quote unquote, us. Therefore, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Except we had to fix it. Because people started saying, well, wait. Moneyed, rich white guys with land aren't the only people that matter here. There's others of us. And those others of us had to actually fight to get the right to be included as citizens. But there was a model before this, right? So it's a traditional canon that basically says democracy came out of the West and that we had to give our model of democracy and our model of civilization to everybody else as if nobody else has civilization. So both in Africa and here on Turtle Island, indigenous democracy. So African democracy originated in the time before the pyramids and before cities in the sense of building infrastructure beyond the natural environment. Okay? You can make a teepee, you can make a hut out of naturally available materials. But that's not the same as sewers. That's not the same as a water system. Okay? You need cities to do that because once a village gets to a certain size, people have to understand that you can't poop upstream because that's our drinking water. I mean, no, it comes down to, look, in a civilization, who's taking out the garbage? Where are you storing the garbage? How are you dealing with basic sanitation? I mean, that's, look, we all can't dig a hole in the woods and have that work if we get to a certain size. You know, when early Europeans started exploring Africa,